think we are facing a real birth of something new, of a new Ukraine, in music, in filmmaking, and it's burgeoning. My name is Slava Vakarchuk. I am a singer in Ukrainian band Okean Elze.
Коли настане день, закінчиться війна, там загубив себе.
I feel this Ukrainian wave coming to the world, and I hope that the world's gonna embrace it.
My name is Alona. My stage name is Alona. I'm rap singer from Ukraine, and today I had possibility to say something very important, to spread Ukrainian culture and this cultural boom.
My name is Maria Kvitka. I'm Ukrainian singer. It was something crazy because I won The Voice. It was absolutely unexpected. But very special for me because it's a new world opening, and I want to make them through my music, through this dialogue, through everything I do, to understand that we're the same.
My name is Igor Poshuvailo. I am director of the Maidan Museum and coordinator of the Heritage Emergency Response Initiative. Yaroslav Jus, I remember him as a small boy, so with pleasure looked how he was growing up and preserving the tradition of bandura playing, but also modernizing. And it is important to engage younger people so that they feel that their tradition, not tradition of their parents, but this tradition is important to them.
Morning. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kathy Nalivaiko. I'm president of the Ukrainian Institute of America, and I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's program. The video clip that opened just now, this program, is a sneak peek at a special Arts Envoy program created in concert with the State Department and filmmaker Chip Warren, capturing Ukraine's unique culture and making connections between Ukrainian and American cultural traditions. We're pleased that Chip is here with us today. Before we begin our event, I invite you to join me in a moment of silence to show our deep respect for and unwavering solidarity with the Ukrainian people and for our enduring commitment to the core values of freedom, democracy, and self-determination. As we have seen throughout Russia's unprovoked war of aggression against Ukraine, the pursuit of these principles is fraught with danger and challenges. Let us pause to remember the daily sacrifices made by our courageous individuals in their defense, and especially to honor the memory of those, and there are many of them, who have paid the ultimate price. If you could please stand and Thank you. Today's discussion on Ukrainian culture in a time of war is not merely an academic exercise. It is a critical exploration of a topic with historic significance. In the face of adversity, Ukraine has demonstrated extraordinary resilience, and its cultural heritage remains a source of inspiration and identity for its people. The importance of this discussion cannot be overstated, and we are privileged to have such esteemed individuals here to share their insights and expertise. We are gathered today to explore Ukraine's cultural heritage, examining how it has been shaped by the challenges of conflict and the enduring spirit of the Ukrainian people. As we navigate these discussions, let us keep in mind that the cultural exchange and understanding we foster here can have a profound impact on the world stage, promoting peace, unity, and the preservation of cultural treasures for generations to come. In this context, the work of the Ukrainian Institute of America takes on even greater significance. Our mission to preserve, promote, and share the rich tapestry of Ukrainian culture ensures that it survives and thrives. I'm delighted to announce the presence of several special guests among us today. Not that all of you aren't special, but there are a few that we're going to point out. In particular, we are honored to welcome 3 soldiers from Ukraine who fought bravely in defense of their country and who are here in the United States for the next several weeks for treatment and rehabilitation through the amazing work of Kind Deeds, an organization that was formed shortly after the full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Oleksandr Rubtsov, and it's run by Executive Director Anastasia MacArthur. Many thanks to you and to your organization for the amazing work that you do, and welcome to our brave soldiers. Please also join me in welcoming Natalia Mystetskyi, who's in the front row here. She serves as consul at the Consulate General of Ukraine in New York. Her attendance here underscores the importance of this gathering as we come together with diplomatic representatives to explore the various facets of Ukrainian identity and heritage. And now it gives me great pleasure to introduce an esteemed guest, someone whose work in the realm of diplomacy and public affairs has been pivotal in advancing global understanding and cooperation. Her advocacy for the transformative power of cultural exchange and importance of public diplomacy has been instrumental in building bridges between nations. Please join me in extending a very warm welcome to the Honorable Elizabeth M. Allen, Undersecretary of State for Public Diplomacy and Public Affairs. Liz?
All right, we'll give this mic a try here. Thank you, Kathy, so much for the gracious introduction. I'm so honored to be joined by our members of the Ukrainian military, by so many partners in the audience from academic, cultural, and government institutions, including a lot of my colleagues from the State Department, especially the Bureau of Educational and Cultural Affairs, who are here in the front row, and for whom we have to thank for partnering with this event with the Ukrainian Institute. I have to tell you, Secretary of State Tony Blinken was here last year, right here in this building, and he had said to a lot of us after that visit, what a beautiful and moving place it was. And it did take coming here in person this morning really to understand what he meant. It is an honor to be here with all of you, particularly in this place where we can reflect on the events of the last year. And even before that, obviously, what has led to this day. I personally was in Kyiv with then Vice President Biden in 2014. And so understanding Ukrainian culture and Ukrainian heritage was something I was at least grateful to be able to experience firsthand on the ground, and can't wait to pay a visit back to Ukraine. As mentioned by Kathy, I wanted to acknowledge some of our dedicated and inspiring participants of State Department exchange programs. We do a lot of cultural and academic programming with countries around the world, and among them, as mentioned, our filmmaker and arts envoy Chip Warren, who created this film, as well as one of our panelists, who you'll see on stage after me, which I'm very much looking to hearing from. Volodymyr Sheiko is one of our Hubert Humphrey alumni, and we're very proud And we are very proud to support you in lifting up your voices and championing all your efforts. I want to also note that we invited our friends from Duolingo here today. Duolingo is a unique partnership that we're doing through our public affairs team to highlight our shared commitment to Ukrainians' cultural preservation and using language to promote mutual understanding. Duolingo has 74 million users, and Ukrainian is the fastest growing language that people are seeking out to learn, many in a show of solidarity with Ukrainians from over the past year. And lastly, I want to say thank you so much to our speakers who made the time to travel over here for this event today. It was an honor to meet you today. I am mostly looking forward to hearing from you, but you all have to bear with me a little bit just to talk about the work that the State Department is doing in partnership with so many of you and your organizations that's really vital to the future of Ukraine. So I want to say very clearly here this morning, cultural policy is security policy, and the United States will stand with the people of Ukraine for as long as it takes, supporting your efforts to combat Russia's brutal attempts to undermine and erase Ukrainian culture, which, as we know, gets to the heart of identity and democracy. Since we are hosting this event here in the United States, I did want to recognize the many important cultural institutions throughout the United States that have not only supported Ukraine, but have made it possible for the American people to learn more about Ukrainian culture. And as the war goes on, we want to make sure that we are educating the American people as to what's happening and why it matters and why they should stay involved. So we thank the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Philadelphia Orchestra, Carnegie Hall, PEN America, CEC ArtsLink, the Kennedy Center, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, as I mentioned, they're right across the street, and the U.S. Army for all the work that they're doing with different programs. As Kathy mentioned, I'm very honored to lead the State Department's public diplomacy efforts, and we define public diplomacy quite broadly, ways in which foreign policy and national security issues interact with people around the world, either through storytelling, through exchange programs, through cultural work, through arts work, and through the information space. We're also doing a lot of work on counter-disinformation and information integrity. But all of our work is really playing this vital role in supporting Ukrainian culture. Those exchange programs are really vital to this effort, so I want to tell you a little bit about them today. At the State Department, we are engaging with Ukrainian artists, writers, students, filmmakers, athletes, and cultural heritage curators through programs that allow them to study and stay involved in their fields during the war and prepare for life after victory. Academic exchange programs continue to provide life-altering opportunities. There are 55 Ukrainian Fulbrighters in the United States right now, and we are increasing the size of this fall's Ukrainian student group coming on Fulbright. Irina Tofan is one of those Fulbright students. She's here today. Where are you? Hello. Irina is an MA candidate in museum studies at NYU, learning from experts in the field of museum digitization. Irina made time to be with us today, and really you are a wonderful example of the resilience of academic and cultural exchanges between the United States and Ukraine. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Celebrating our 30th anniversary next month, our Future Leaders Exchange, or FLEX program, has provided scholarships for more than 7,000 Ukrainian young people to attend an American high school. Many of you may have grown up with some. I certainly did in my community outside Buffalo, New York. And I'm particularly proud to note that a 1998-1999 FLEX program alumni, Rustem Umarov, he took office as Ukraine's Minister of Defense just earlier this month. He's a Crimean Tatar. He is the highest ranking currently serving FLEX alumni in the program's 30-year history and the first Muslim cabinet member in Ukraine's history. We are so proud to count him amongst our alumni ranks. And finally, Olga Dolanina was inspired to launch the Break the Ice program after she participated in our ESPN Women's Global Sports Mentoring program. Through Break the Ice, displaced children in Ukraine are able to play table hockey to build resilience, cope with stress, and manage their PTSD. And in February, 7 members of the staff of Kyiv's Holodomor Memorial and Museum participated in an International Visitor Leadership Program, or IVLP, that some of you have been on yourselves, entitled Memorializing History Through Education and Museums. This is just an example of how we at the State Department are looking to flex our programs, to modernize our programs, to evolve our programs, to meet the needs that we are hearing from the Ukrainian people. We want to be responsive to what will be useful to them. We are also, of course, supporting Ukrainians' desire to tell their own story. The most powerful voices in this war have been Ukrainians, and we at the State Department, through our public affairs and exchange program efforts, continue to look to lift up those voices. Through our American Film Showcase, participants can view documentary and feature films, enjoy virtual opportunities to engage with professional filmmakers, and take master classes on the impact of social storytelling. Writing is obviously a creative outlet to express what cannot be said out loud, especially in tumultuous times. So our International Writers Program is implemented a distance learning curve writing course for young Ukrainian writers still in Ukraine. And finally, on the exchange program front, we also understand the transformative power of language learning. As mentioned with our friends from Duolingo, we also have a variety of language-based exchange programs whether Ukrainian or English, opportunities for language learning can drive everything from economic mobility to cultural exchanges to new friendships. Language learning truly transforms the future of families and cohesion of communities. And finally, I want to talk about the work of our State Department Cultural Heritage Center. Critically important work that is driving this conversation. The U.S. is helping Ukraine preserve and protect its cultural heritage. In February, the Cultural Heritage Center announced the launch of the Ukraine Cultural Heritage Response Initiative. And with $7 million committed thus far, this initiative is helping Ukraine protect and repair its cultural heritage. We are pleased today to announce 3 new projects under this initiative. The first, SciArc, a pioneering U.S. nonprofit, will partner with Archaic, a Ukrainian NGO, to document conflict-afflicted cultural heritage objects in Ukraine, including 19th century Cossack boats and stone stelae that are thousands of years old. The World Monuments Fund, a frequent partner of the U.S. Ambassador's Fund for Cultural Preservation, will document, stabilize, and repair an early 20th century landmark damaged during a Russian missile attack. And finally, the Agency for Cultural Resilience, a new Ukrainian NGO, will conduct damage assessments in liberated areas of the country and prioritize damaged cultural sites for emergency stabilization. We are so proud to be announcing and supporting these new programs. This work must continue. This work is critical, and we are very glad to be partnering with all of you on it today. I will end by affirming the strong ties between Ukraine and the United States. As Secretary Blinken said in his visit to Ukraine just a few weeks ago, quote, "The United States is committed to empowering Ukraine to write its own future." In the crucible of President Putin's brutal and ongoing war, the United States and Ukraine have forged a partnership that is stronger than ever and growing every day in so many ways, including in all of the work that I talked about and that you'll hear about today from our Ukrainian panelists. We will continue to collaborate with Ukrainian partners on programs and initiatives that respond to their needs. And as we remind ourselves, nothing about Ukraine without Ukraine. So now, why everyone is here to hear from our Ukrainian panelists, we look forward to hearing from you, leaders in the Ukrainian cultural community, about the current situation in Ukraine, how to preserve, build up, support Ukrainian heritage, identity, resilience, and culture. Let us know what you need. We're so eager to hear about your work. Thank you very much for being here, and I'll turn it over to Glenn Davies, who leads our public affairs work on the ground at U.S. Embassy Kyiv.
I want to welcome all of you to our panel here today. Thank you for coming on, as it says, Ukrainian culture in a time of war, identity, heritage, and resilience. My name is Glenn Davis. As Undersecretary Allen said, I am the Foreign Service Officer at the Department of State and currently the Cultural Affairs Officer at the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv. And we have here today a real panel of cultural leaders in Ukraine, come here from Ukraine expressly for this event. I'm going to introduce them briefly. You have their full bios in your program, and then we'll start our conversation. We hope to talk for 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to you in the audience for questions. So if you do have questions, just hold them until that particular time. So in no particular, I'll go left to right here. First, let me introduce Volodymyr Sheiko, who is the Director General of the Ukrainian Institute in Ukraine. the same name, but not exactly the same, not connected to the Ukrainian Institute here in America. The Ukrainian Institute in Ukraine is the Foreign Ministry of Ukraine's cultural diplomacy wing, and Volodymyr heads that up. Next to him is Olesia Ostrovska. Olesia is the director of the Art Arsenal, which is, if you ever get to Kyiv, is an amazing building. There's an incredible set of different exhibitions that go through there. It's the biggest, I think you said, cultural institution in Ukraine, and so very glad that she can be here with us today. And then on the end, Volodymyr Yermolenko, who is the president of PEN Ukraine, is a philosophy professor, writer, very well-known intellectual in the country. So those are our three panelists. If we could just have a short round of applause. So my first question today would be really from an American perspective. So many of us in the United States don't know that much about Ukrainian culture. We might know the tune of the Carol of the Bells, which is actually the Shedrick Carol, but a lot of Americans may not even know that it's a Ukrainian tune. So if you were going to describe to us Ukrainian culture, like what makes it unique, what characterizes it, are there some examples of it that you think are particularly illustrative? How would you do that? And maybe I'll start with Volodymyr.
Thank you, Glenn. It's a great honor to be here, and thank you very much for this invitation. For us who are living in Ukraine, living in Kyiv, it's always a very challenging task to go abroad, challenging not only physically but psychologically. We have our families, of course, in Ukraine, and this night there was another huge missile strike on Ukrainian cities, and unfortunately we're living in this situation every day. So it's very important to organize this event so that we share experience. We talk not only about ideas but about people, about persons, about experience of the war. And I'm always honored to be in the presence of our soldiers. We travel a lot to the frontline areas with PEN Ukraine. We actually see how the situation makes the connection of the Ukrainian culture and the connection of the Ukrainian army very close. Lots of our cultural personalities are on the front line. Poets, writers, screenplayers, screenwriters, cineasts, musicians. And tragically, lots of them already are not with us. And we can talk about this later, I think. But talking about Ukrainian culture, I think there are several elements. I would just talk briefly about several elements which I think we need to keep in mind. The first, I always try to describe the Ukrainian history and culture as a nation of despite. So we do lots of things in despite of something, in despite of so we're talking about freedom as a basic value in Ukraine, but it's not that freedom that is in a very beneficial circumstances. It has always been oppressed, it has always been under big pressure. And the remarkable thing about Ukrainian culture, if you think of it, if you think of 20th century, if you think of two big world wars, which were actually primarily going in a very much extent in Eastern Europe and particularly in Ukraine. Then you have the Holodomor tragedy, at least 4 million people dead. Then you have Second World War, up to 10 million people dead. And then you ask a question, how it is possible then that there is still any culture on these lands? And there is still artists, and there is still artistic community. And they are still willing to pursue their ideas of freedom and creativity. So I think this is a very important element. The culture which goes despite something, not due to something, but despite something, despite the imperial oppression and despite violence. And I think this anti-violence idea of the Ukrainian culture is very interesting. The second thing, I wear a T-shirt with Maria Primachenko painting, and maybe my colleagues will disagree with me, but for me personally, in the 20th century, you have two major Ukrainian painters who are, for me personally, Maria Primachenko and Kazimir Malevich, and they're totally different because Malevich is a major avant-gardist, a major modernist in a way, Kubo-futurist and then suprematist. And then Primachenko is somebody who goes very deep into the folkloric roots of the culture, right? And it's very interesting how Ukrainian culture was actually always trying to combine modernity and tradition, going into future, but going into the past, and finding the elements of the future in the past, finding the elements of the past in the future. So you've seen that in that beautiful film, how many musicians are now working with ethnic elements, but at the same time modernizing them. And I think it's indeed very important. And the last thing, and this relates to the general political culture of Ukraine. I think we should really understand that there is a huge difference between the Ukrainian tradition and let's call it imperial tradition. So imperial, not only Russian tradition, is the tradition of politics, top-down politics. You have a Tsar, you identify yourself with the Tsar, with the monarch. You think that you not exist without this monarch. Your community does not exist without this monarch. In Ukraine, it's totally different. We disidentify them ourselves with the monarch. We see that we are different from the monarch. Not only the monarch in Moscow, but also in the monarch in Kyiv. I mean, there is a metaphor, of course. And there is idea of grassroots culture, what Ukrainians are calling hromada. And I am, as a philosopher, for me, one of the major concepts of the Ukrainian political idea is the concept of community, hromada, which goes from Drahomanov and always onwards. It's a very interesting. So to some people from outside, it seems to be very anarchic. But in some elements, this anarchy is a very creative. So sometimes it produces differences and discrepancies, but this is the way how Ukrainian society, Ukrainian culture functions, and also Ukrainian cultural field. And it is very important to understand that you cannot really make a top-down, approach to the Ukrainian society, Ukrainian culture. It will always come from within.
Thank you, Volodymyr. I think when I first went to Kyiv, one of the biggest impressions I got, which surprised me, was just how much grassroots activity there is in Ukraine, how many Ukrainians have stepped up to help with the war effort, to organize NGOs, to advocate for different things. Olesia, over to you.
Thank you, Glenn. And once again, thank you for having this event today. And thank you for inviting us. It's very important for us to be able to share our thoughts with you, and we appreciate it greatly. Actually, when Volodymyr was speaking, I realized that I was thinking about your question in very similar terms. I was thinking about something which Volodymyr called political culture. So if you want to understand political culture of Ukraine, it's in Ukrainian literature, in the literature of 19th and 20th century to a great extent. And this is how you understand what this society is about. Let me give you an example. There is one poem which is absolutely known to many of you and to all Ukrainians, and that's a poem by Taras Shevchenko called Caucasus. And there are lines which were quoted by US President Bill Clinton when I was a student in Kyiv back in 90s, and it's still remembered in Kyiv. And those lines are «Борітеся, поборете». And in English, it would translate probably «fight and you shall prevail». And that's very much the motive of Ukrainian political culture, and it's also something that explains quite well how Ukrainians see this war, this Russian war today, and their response. What should be done? I'll give you another example how you can understand Ukrainian society and its politics through literature. there is another very prominent figure of the beginning of 20th century, end of 19th, beginning of 20th century. His name was Ivan Franko, a poet from Lviv in Western Ukraine, but he was also a politician, a man who spent a large part of his life jailed for his political activities. And he's also an iconic person for Ukrainians. And now there was one more word that Volodymyr used. That was word presence. So what's happening in Ukraine now and how you can understand it through culture? I'll give you an example from my own institution. Just this spring, we had an exhibition created by my colleagues, two curators, Natasha Chichasova and Alexander Solovyov, and it was called Forms of Presence. It was contemporary art exhibition, basically because contemporary culture is the major field you can work with culture in Ukraine. You cannot really work with you cannot show, let me put it this way, museum artifacts, for example, because they need to be protected. And there is no one who can make a decision to put museum artifacts on display and risk their existence in the face of airstrikes. It's different with contemporary art because an artist, a contemporary living artist, may take the same type of decision about his or her artwork as about his or her body. So if you decide to risk your body and live in Kyiv or Kharkiv or Dnipro, any Ukrainian city, you can make the same decision about your artwork. So you treat it a little bit like your own body. That's why there is an agent who can make a decision about display and work with an artwork, right? So this is how contemporary culture becomes a very, very important field to work with. This is why even traditional, in a sense, a museum, but let's say art, history museums, they work more and more with contemporary art. So that was a digression. And now back to this exhibition called Forms of Presence. My colleagues tried to look at the artistic production as a kind of countermeasure to war. Because what does war do? War produces absence through ruining, through destruction, through, let's say, missile strikes. But what artists do, artists produce presence through creating actual artworks. So they create something material and they also create ideas. So this is how Ukrainian artists understand their mission in Ukraine now, to be a countermeasure to absence, to produce presence. And that's probably rather typical for most Ukrainian creators today.
Volodymyr? Thank you very much to all of you for coming today. Thank you very much, Undersecretary Allen, for your generous remarks, and huge respect to our soldiers who have been serving in the Ukrainian army. Thank you so much for what you are doing. This question that you asked, I have been asking myself for the past at least year and a half, but even before that. And this is probably a topic that comes up in my conversations with my fellow culture managers or artists or indeed friends. What does it mean what Ukrainian culture means today? How we define our connection to Ukraine? What is Ukrainian in Ukrainian culture? And in a recent conversation with a great Ukrainian poet, Katerina Kalitko, who's a dear friend of mine, we kind of had this shared understanding and shared answer to that question that for Ukrainians, culture today means freedom. And it's central, indeed, a central concept and notion in our understanding and connection to culture. And the second is the connection to the land. And I think this is one of the strongest, I think, connections to the land, to the physical space, to the landscapes and to the cities and towns of Ukraine that is kind of manifests itself in many artistic expressions of today, but also in Ukraine's culture heritage and culture of the past. And when I think about this presence, I also think about so many Ukrainians and Ukrainian artists and culture makers who left Ukraine a long time ago or very recently, and how many Ukrainians are actually out there in the world and don't live in Ukraine, or who are forced to flee the country. I think it's also a very distinct characteristic of Ukrainian culture, that it's not confined to the territory to which is really strongly connected, but also it's present in so many other cultures, contexts that have mutually influenced each other. And I think this building is a great example, and the history of this building is a great example of that, of what I'm talking about, and the great artists that are exhibited in this space, particularly Alexei Alexis Grushenko, as he's known in the English-speaking world. His works are exhibited throughout the building. He left Ukraine in 1919 following the revolution and the occupation, the Bolshevik occupation of Ukraine, Ukraine's struggle for independence. He ended up in then Constantinople for 2 years, where he published and wrote great diaries. And he ended up then in Vienna for several years, and then moved to Paris, where he became known as a member of the Paris art school of the early 20th century. So for me, his journey and his transformation and his multiple identity also reminds me of so many other Ukrainian artists who have become known better known in other cultures, including the American culture or many European cultures. So it's also I think a distinct characteristic of how we can describe Ukrainian culture today. And let's also not forget that it's a diverse culture. It's a culture made up by a culture of Crimean Tatars, of Jews, of Poles, of course Ukrainians themselves, and so many other ethnic groups and communities who consider or have considered Ukraine as their homeland. And that's also something that we're trying as a Ukrainian Institute to represent in the world, this diversity and multiplicity of identities and cultural artifacts and cultural assets that Ukraine has to offer to the world.
Great, thank you. Thank all of you for really interesting and sort of different responses. I want to pick up on something that Olesia alluded to and maybe dig in a little more deeply to the role of culture in the war. We obviously read in the United States about what's going on in the front lines, about Russian attacks on Ukrainian cities, and it seems natural that we would focus on security issues, military assistance, humanitarian needs for refugees. So why is culture actually not an add-on, but something that's sort of central to this war, especially since the start of the full-scale invasion in February of 2022?
First, let me quote Undersecretary who said that cultural policy is security policy. And it's a brilliant phrase, and I think we need to keep that in mind. But first, let me tell you some stories, because it's very important that we understand what is going on physically, right? When we traveled recently to Zaporizhia is a big city, and about 70% of the region are occupied. And you probably, if you follow the news, you know that there is a liberation attempt by the Ukrainian army. It's going very difficult, but it's going. So we need to really have faith and trust in that and help it. But then we talk to people in Zaporizhia, and they, from the local writers community, and they are saying, look, we have people in the writers community who were in the occupied villages, who were dictating their poems by phone. And a person in the non-occupied territory would write it down and then read it aloud. Why dictating by phone? Because this person was under occupation in the bomb shelters, usually without phone connection. And just the mere fact that people would write a poem, take a phone, find a connection, call your friend in Zaporizhia and dictate it. It shows many things actually, right? It shows how there is a wish to write a poem, a wish to reach out to a person who would read it. Then we travel across Ukraine. We're going to the occupied territories. One example of a city called Kyiv, which is an ancient Ukrainian Cossack capital also, but very close to the Russian border, 10 kilometers from the Russian border. Paradoxically, the war did not go into this town because Russians just crossed the border and went farther to Kyiv. But usually when we come to a local community with PEN Ukraine, bringing books there, we say, we came here not to tell you anything, we came here to listen to you. And people tell their stories, they often cry, they often smile, but in this particular town, they started reading their poems. So they were not professional poets, they were just volunteers, they started reading their poems. And it was kind of this act of incredible need for these senses and for this creativity. So I do think that when we think about this war, we should also think about meanings and values and senses. What we need to understand is that Russia is trying to erase these meanings. The Russian recolonization, which is now going on, the attempt of recolonization, is the attempt of assimilation. Let's not forget that one of the major strategies of the Russians with regard to Ukrainians is to say that you Ukrainians are the same as us. So you don't have a right to be different. And how you stress your right to be different? Through culture. There is no other way. We see why Russians put so much effort on culture themselves, because we see that on occupied territories, they take their teachers, school teachers, Ukrainian teachers, they bring it to Russia, they teach them how to teach history in a new Russian way, right? They kidnap Ukrainian children to reprogram them, to change them from within, from internally, to impose their own culture on them. And this is very important. Another story, we came to Kherson in December last year. Kherson is Russian troops are 1 kilometer from the city, okay, across the river. And therefore Kherson is a still very dangerous place because of the artillery shelling. It's not only about missiles, it's about artillery. So basically when we were asking the local administration whether we can go to Kherson, they say, okay, it's just the same as Bakhmut, like on the front line. I think it's not the same, but still. So we went there, and despite this artillery shelling, we went to the art museum in Kherson, which was robbed by the Russian troops. 10,000 pieces of art, just stolen. 10,000 objects, beautiful paintings. One of the best Ukrainian painters were there. They just stolen, and this is what is happening. I have a very little publication from PEN Ukraine here, and you can find it on our website. They destroyed museums like the Museum of Skovoroda, the Museum of Primachenko, the Museum of Quinji, and they robbed and stolen art. And this is, I think, very important in this element of appropriation. And the last story is, of course, I cannot avoid talking about my friends who are no longer with us, and also big cultural figures. So we recently our friend Victoria Amelina passed away, who was a great Ukrainian, who is a great Ukrainian writer, documentalist of the war crimes. And she was traveling across the eastern part of Ukraine, mainly to document war crimes. This is also the role of the cultural figure. So a novelist who wrote brilliant novels, who started writing after the full-scale invasion brilliant poems, was actually going with the organization Truth Hounds to collect Russian war crimes. And one of the stories she came across a diary of another Ukrainian writer who is called Volodymyr Vakulenko, who was living near Izum and was under Russian occupation, and he was killed kidnapped and killed by the Russian soldiers. But before he was kidnapped, he dug his diary into the land, and this is the land which, in which you really hide very often the most treacherous things. He dug in his diary. Victoria came after the occupation. She talked to his father. His father knew that the diary was there, but didn't remember where exactly. So they dug the land to search his diary. They found his diary. Victoria wrote a preface. And 1 month after she finished, less than 1 month after she finished this preface, she went to Kramatorsk, to a place where we have been lots of times actually, to a beautiful restaurant there. And there was a Russian attack, missile attack, and they knew, and this was also a war crime, they knew that there were many people in this place because it was one of the popular places. Kramatorsk is like 40 kilometers from the front line. And this attack was on 27th of June, and she passed away on the 1st of July, on Vakulenko's birthday. So there is some very, very deep coincidence in that. So we just published the diary of Vakulenko in Ukrainian, and it is also with preface of Victoria and with some other texts. So this is also I cannot say the role of Ukrainian artists. This is what they do. This is what we all do. And I can go on and on enumerating people who are on the front line actually. And maybe this is for another replica.
Well, when I think about roles of culture in time of war, there will be, I think about a few functions it has. One, and the most important probably, is just like in any other time, to reflect on the world and on the condition of a human being in that world, and to kind of create understanding of what world is in some moment. That's why we still do exhibitions. That's why we still do theater plays, because we need to reflect about the world we live in now. Second thing, which Volodymyr was mentioning, is to testify, is to look what's going on, to write it down, to tell the story. This is one of the reasons why it's almost impossible to protect Ukrainian cultural figures, Ukrainian creators. I was thinking when Victoria Amelina died, I was thinking about any ways to protect Ukrainian creators today. So one way would be to kind of send them abroad, or many of them create scholarships, not to draft men to the army, but that's absurd. You cannot do that, because the role of a cultural figure is to testify, to look what's going on and to talk about it in a creative way. So you cannot really create any protection program for that. Then another function, which is connected to the previous one, would be to speak to the world, to tell the story, to explain what's going on. And this is what we saw in the film at the beginning of this panel. And there would be one more role, and that's the role would be to add to the resilience of people living in Ukraine right now. Well, for example, in my institution, tomorrow we are opening a children's festival, and it's an educational festival, how to help children learn through culture and with help of culture, especially in times like today in Ukraine, when we have huge educational shortages because schools are not functioning properly. Children cannot really go to school on daily basis as they used to, because you either need bomb shelter or there are missile alerts. So it's the learning process is disrupted. What can cultural institutions do in such situation is to step in and help fill in the gaps through different means, through all sorts of learning artistic programs. This is how you add to the resilience of your society at at war. And the last one, the one that Volodymyr has already mentioned, is to manifest your difference, and that is separation from the empire, basically. When you describe what kind of society you are, you do it through culture. Culture is the mean to describe those things. And then it's very obvious that there is a different political culture, a different historical track, and it's a different society. And this is something that the empire cannot really function with. So those would be the functions as I see.
I would like to quote my dear friend Dora Chomiak, the president of Razom for Ukraine, a charitable organization you may be well familiar with, who said last year that when it was hard for many people around the world to locate Ukraine on the map, all there was to help them was culture. And I think that's a perfect description and summary of why culture matters for Ukraine today, because it does help distinguish Ukraine from its aggressive neighbor. It does help to project its identity, or I would say identities, to the rest of the world, and to advocate and rally for more support and solidarity in our struggle for independence. And I agree with Volodymyr that it's only possible through culture and through cultural interventions and cultural projections. And that quote really stayed with me. I hope it will stay with you as well. In my work, in my daily work as a cultural diplomat, we see how fragmented international understanding and awareness of Ukraine is in so many ways, in understanding of our political culture, of our history, of our art, in basically knowing how the society lives and what values it has and what aspirations for the future it has. And I'm absolutely convinced that the best way to tell those stories, to send these messages out, is through artistic expressions of today's artists who, like Olesia said, testify, document, and immortalize in many ways what Ukraine is going through today. But also that knowledge sits within the cultural heritage of Ukraine and our culture of the past, which is now being systematically looted, destroyed, and is in constant danger of being hit or being burned down. And that's why I think one of the kind of requests and pleas for help that Ukraine sends out to the rest of the world is not just to focus on military aid or economic aid, which are of course of paramount importance, but not forget about culture, about supporting Ukrainian culture, helping Ukrainian creatives and culture makers to do their work, not to change their profession, not to switch to other, disciplines or professions, or not to leave the country, because I think for artists, it's really important to maintain that connection to the country, to be within the context and situation, to be able to, confidently and accurately reflect on what's going on, being away. Even for a week, when I'm away out of Ukraine for a week, I feel disconnected. I feel uneasy. I want to come back because I really need to have this immediate connection with my country, with my people who live just next door from me, to be able to tell Ukraine's story internationally in a confident way, with integrity and honesty. So that connection is really important.
That's very important what Volodymyr is saying, actually, because it's really, I think it connects everybody. Like, people from the outside are asking, so how do you people live there? And for us, I mean, it's impossible to leave the country without really having this urgent need to come back. Therefore, we come for a few days only. Sorry.
And we're all going back soon. I think as an American who's there, it's very was surprising, but also inspiring to see how much culture still goes on. Right, there's concerts in some of the subway stations in Kyiv are some of the deepest in the world, and there'll be musical concerts down there. Like, there'll be a performance if there's an air raid. People go down into whatever bunkers there, and then they come back up for the rest of the performance, unintended intermissions, right? So there's a real fierce, I think, attempt to continue to express yourselves and hold, events and readings and publish books and do performances. So what I'd like to get to at sort of as the last question here is following up on something that Volodymyr Sheiko just said. How can we help? The Undersecretary Allen really showed how the U.S. government has been doing things to support you and your work. And as the working in Kyiv, I'm very proud of the efforts that we've made to do that. But there are still needs, and in the United States, we don't just work by the government; we work by our citizens, really, helping to partner and stepping up to meet needs as well. So, are there specific ways that you would want to highlight for this audience here of where there are still needs that Ukraine has that maybe some of us in this audience or some of the people who watch this this movie, this film of this event, should hear?
If I start again, my friends will hate.
I think there are two basically avenues, two directions. One is to help, in the US, and another way is to help in Ukraine. Because what I mean help in the US. Yesterday, we went to New York Public Library, and there is a very interesting exhibition there. And there are a number of Ukrainian artifacts and stories included into this exhibition. So looking at your institutions with this sort of Ukrainian lens, looking what Ukrainian objects do you have in the collection, how to tell about those objects and Ukrainian society through those objects is very, very helpful because we are struggling to explain ourselves. So that's one way. Another way would be to support as many Ukrainian voices as possible, and that would be translating Ukrainian literature into English, publishing Ukrainian texts, commissioning Ukrainian authors to write texts for American outlets or Ukrainian or American publishers, commissioning Ukrainian composers to write a piece for let's say a concert or any other performance. That would be another way that helps in two ways. That helps to tell about Ukrainian culture, or even in three ways, to help produce more culture this way, and to support the creator financially through commissioning to create a piece. That would be one more way. There is also a very, very important, crucial a tool for Ukraine, and that would be to support Ukrainian institutions in Ukraine, because we are really in a very weak position. We are very fragile because many people evacuated, budgets have been cut, functioning under constant missile threat is very complicated. For example, this May, if you remember, during the whole month, Russia was attacking Kyiv every night. So every night there was a missile strike on Kyiv, which meant that people didn't sleep. So people didn't sleep for 30 nights. And at the same time, those same people have to work double because they have to work for their communities in their cities, in Kyiv, let's say, and they have to work to explain Ukrainian story to their international partners, which was not the case years ago, actually. There are many more international connections now, and international connections means more work. So those people didn't sleep all the time. And that makes our institutions, and what are institutions? People plus rules, right? So that makes those institutions very, very fragile because people are exhausted. So helping and supporting institutions is crucial. Also in terms of transforming those institutions from late Soviet type of institutions into something much more relevant for Ukrainian society today, and that is reforming those institutions and sometimes also excuse me for being that bureaucratic, and also supporting government, the transformation of Ukrainian government in the segment of culture as well. And that would be crucial in my view.
I would like to strongly agree with Olesia about support for Ukrainian cultural institutions, which is a rather kind of unconventional for many international donors and embassies and programs that allocate funds, for example, to on a project by project basis, sort of one-off funding or conditional funding. But I think it's really important, particularly in the post-war reconstruction plans for Ukraine, to take this into consideration, how the international community can sustain and support institutions in a longer term to actually put us from a survival mode in which we live basically daily into a mode where we can think about development, about capacity building, about providing more security to our staff who have been struggling. All of them, I think, we all have been struggling with mental health issues and with war-related traumas. So I think that's also very important to care for people who work in this sector, because usually they work in rather precarious circumstances with comparably much lower salaries, compared to other industries and sectors. So this sort of institutional framework for international support for Ukraine is really, really important. And I think it's also crucial not to focus only on infrastructural projects or projects that basically reconstruct physical objects across the country or indeed along the front line, because again, coming back to people, it's equally important to invest in people, in their development, in their international exposure. And the programs that the State Department has been running and doing have been incredibly important to build capacity, develop a lot of professionals in the field of culture. And a lot of my peers and fellow colleagues in Ukraine have been on such programs provided by different international partners, and they've been really, really precious for us. If we kind of come back to this sort of international dimension, or what can be done in the US to support Ukrainian culture, I would say we would encourage US-based institutions to rethink their programming strategies, to include more content from Ukraine, be it music or theater or visual art or film. It's not a secret that Ukrainian culture, but also cultures of many other Central and Eastern European countries, have been traditionally underrepresented internationally in programming strategies of major institutions. Unlike the Russian culture, which has enjoyed a lot more privileges and international attention, and has this reputation of being great, I'm happy that this myth is being deconstructed as we speak. But that void and that emptiness has to be filled with something new. And in many conversations that I have with our international partners, I urge them, please don't play it safe. Take risks. Learn about new cultures. Learn about something that you haven't learned in your, university education or professional career, because there is a breadth of cultures out there, unnoticed, unwanted, or just ignored, largely because of various structural reasons, but also subjective reasons. And we would love American institutions to be more invested in what Ukraine has to offer, to be more curious about what this field, the cultural field in Ukraine, has to offer. And I'm not talking about charity. It's not charity, right? It's looking out for great, competitive, confident artistic expressions that may be and will be, I'm sure, of interest to American audiences, much like other great cultural content that is abundant, particularly here, of course, in New York. But I know that a lot of you represent local institutions, and I hope that you will hear this message. We, as an institution, the Ukrainian Institute, can act as an advisory kind of intermediary advisory organization to you should you wish to connect to someone in Ukraine, to local institutions in Ukraine, or engage individual artists. We can always provide that expertise and those connections to you to help you with that. But I can't overestimate how important it is today, but also 5 and 10 years down the line, for Ukrainian culture to be present and to communicate what we've just discussed.
And Volodymyr, last word over to you, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Now my friends will hate me because I speak last.
It's like being the speaker before dinner, right?
So I think it's important to really reflect why the world needs Ukrainian culture. Because it's not only about our identity. It's, of course, very important about our identity. But I think there is much more in that. And why Ukrainian culture during the war presents such a treasure for the world? And my answer is very simple. Human culture is very much historically, I mean, if you take different epochs, you see that treasure coming out of the very tragic experience. You see that treasures things coming out of this meeting with death and meeting with suffering and tragedy. I mean, we can talk about from Iliad until the way how European avant-garde was reacting to the First World War, or we can think about how Renaissance was born out of the, difficult experience of the chronic diseases, or how Baroque was born from the 30 Years' War, etc., etc. I mean, this is a very treacherous thing, which I think this fragility. So it's the stress on human fragility, out of which the reflection about human nature, about our mortality, and this mortality brings lots of things, like human connection, how we can be compassionate to others, how can we really go beyond our boundaries and help others. And I think this is very important. So the culture during the war is not, okay, some little weak people whom we need to just bring some humanitarian aid. No, it's a huge contribution right now to the world culture. What is going right now in the Ukrainian poetry is amazing. All the major Ukrainian poets are my dear friends. And I mean, it's amazing how this reflection is going on in the poetic language. And this poetry is really universal. It really talks to the hearts and minds of every person on earth. It goes far beyond any political thinking, etc. And I think this is very important. The next thing is Ukrainian culture kind of can show to you to break certain stereotypes, how you address, let's say, national culture, right? Because in Ukraine, there is lots of rethinking of that. Like, what is the part of the Jewish culture in Ukraine? What is the part of the Crimean Tatar culture in Ukraine? It's very interesting how Ukrainians and Crimean Tatars were thinking of themselves out beyond the certain fences, in the 19th and 20th century. And now we realize how similar we are and how this Christian and Muslim world was developing in confrontation, but also in deep cooperation. The whole Cossack culture in Ukraine is unthinkable without the Muslim traditions and Crimean Tatar traditions. The same with Jewish culture. I talk with so many people in America who say, okay, but I have people coming from Ukraine. And then you realize very often, it's either Ukrainian origins or Russian origins or Jewish origins. And then it seems that these were the worlds kind of separate, because the people with Jewish origins were not really reflecting that their family members are coming from Ukraine, and Ukrainian culture was also not very attentive to this multi-ethnic situation. But then if you reflect upon how the Jewish culture and Ukrainian culture was developing together, they have lots of similarities, because it's in the 19th, 20th century, it's all a question of the endangered communities, which are living in the kind of imperial space, and project their being endangered in a different way, suffer in various ways, and then have certain outcomes of that. And for Ukrainians, it's not necessarily a nice story, because we need to talk about pogroms, we need to talk about violence, and this is also very important. So we can think how to write another history even of America from these lands, right? From all these emigres from Ukraine. And on the structural level, what should we do? We need to understand, that funding in Ukraine is very limited right now. Public funding is very, very limited. Volodymyr, Sheiko as a representative and Olesia as representatives of the public institutions can testify that. And it's understandable so. So all the money goes to defense, to the war, etc. So it's important, I think, to think about creatively how can we raise money. Maybe there can be private-public partnership. I know there is a reflection in Open Society Foundation on how to support Ukrainian culture. So we need to understand this in that regard. But also, as I said previously, it's not just about like humanitarian aid to Ukrainian artists. It has much more universal dimension.
Thank you, all three of you, so much for really interesting answers. So we have a little time for some questions from the audience, and I will call on you, and then we have the microphone. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Solomia Vahiv, Ukrainian-born American violinist, professor at the University of Connecticut. And last year, I had an honor to play for Secretary Blinken, Vasil Barvinsky piano trio. And Secretary Blinken was extremely impressed, and rightfully so, because Ukrainian classical music is beautiful. And I'm very honored to share that here at the Ukrainian Institute of America, we have a concert series that entered its 35th season, and for the past 10 years, there were 70 Ukrainian composers that were programmed here on this stage. And I would like to encourage all of you to pick up the flyer that has concert dates with Maestro Yannick Nesessigin performing on December 15th, and the programs with Ukrainian music. Also, I would like to say that here, Ukrainian Institute of America commissioned many pieces by Ukrainian composers. And I'm thrilled that you're talking about Ukrainian music, because quite often Ukrainian culture is being poetry, literature, and the art is being talked about, but not the music. And we have a very important literature that needs to be rediscovered by the rest of the world. So thank you for being here. Thank you for the State Department for helping us to share the light and to share our beautiful Ukrainian culture with the rest of the world. And if I may add to the suggestions how the world can help Ukraine, it's not about just finances and monetary help. I think we all need your expertise, your professional expertise. Museums, we need help documenting the pieces of art that are in museums. Librarians, we need your help cataloging. So we need your professional help. It's not just about financial resources. So, but thank you again for being here, and welcome to the Ukrainian Institute of America.
Thank you for coming.
Hi, I'm Anthony Richter, Open Society Foundations, and so pleased to see this panel brought together here by the State Department. Visiting Ukraine in June of last year, I visited Arsenal and also the Naked Room Gallery. And in the Naked Room, I saw works created immediately in the midst and in the aftermath of the full-scale invasion. And I noticed that the works were all very small. And it occurred to me that artists grabbed what they could and took it with them into bomb shelters. I remember Daniil Nemirovsky in particular, sitting in a bomb shelter in Mariupol. He couldn't help but document what was before his eyes under incredible pressure. And seeing all of this urgent work, really spoke to me about how the creative impulse lives on, especially in these incredibly pressured moments, and how that work travels and represents. And I just wanted to acknowledge that, but also to think about how those on the stage think about how art in this moment is in your field, cultural diplomacy, playing that role, and what can be done to support it, and to respond also to Volodymyr Yermolenko's statement, to as a private foundation, to be open to public-private and other kinds of partnerships to think about how we can get support to the creative sector for now and in the recovery.
Thanks for your comment, Anthony. Olesia, do you want to say anything in response there, or?
Yeah, I think Anthony just giving us one more example how artists do testify and reflect about what's going on with them. And just to add to what you said, what we also noticed, there is an interesting change in artistic media because of the war, because artists have to work with media which is very easy to carry with them, easy to pack. So it's much harder to work with the sculpture, much easier to work with paper, for example. And how all the material part of being in the war zone impacts the material aspect of art. So maybe that could be an interesting topic for research for institutions here as well.
I would just add that really this material part is very important. I remember going to the studio of Mikhailo Reva, an artist from Odessa, and he does the sculptures with the elements of the rockets, right? And another sculpture he made, like a skull of a monster. He did it from the Russian Kamaz, and burnt Kamaz, burnt a big truck, and made it into a sculpture showing the monster. And the sculpture, which is called Moloch, is a big head of the bear, which is obviously the bear. You understand the symbol of it, but made out of the little pieces of these shells and rockets that he finds. So this is also the reflection how you turn this very tragic reality, the reality that kills you, into the art, into the senses. And I think this is one of the most interesting thing in culture during the war. How you turn something that kills you into something that gives life to something.
Can I just add a small thing? What we also noticed through the war is that there is the boundary between fiction and non-fiction, art and life, is really not that strong as it used to be. And there is one art piece in this building that explains that. There is an installation by Жанна Kadyrova called Polyanitya. Those are river stones cut as if they are bread loaves. Жанна did that during evacuation period. She evacuated from Kyiv to Western Ukraine, where she used river stones to kind of play with the meaning. It's all about war. But what's interesting about this installation, Жанна does not sell it to just to museums without one component. She sells those pieces and donates all the money she makes this way to the army. So it's basically both an artistic and fundraising project. And she's donated millions of hryvnias by now, and those are $100,000 to Ukrainian resistance. So this is how this artwork is both an artwork and a civic action.
Yeah, it's a very important element that we didn't talk about. So, you cannot really find a Ukrainian artist, writer, philosopher, whatever, who would not be a volunteer. So every tiny gathering that we have at Penn Ukraine, writing, making poetry, playing music, and by the way, some new genres are being born because the genre of these poetry music gatherings was born in Kharkiv. One day we came in a harsh circumstances during the missile strikes, and we were just playing music and reading poetry. But all these gatherings collect funds to help the civilians and military. So I'm joking that all the professions that Ukrainians have right now turned into one profession, being Ukrainian citizen during the war.
Yeah, and I think we tried to illustrate that in that short clip as well, just the sort of evolving nature. I've seen this genre of Ukrainians making art out of military objects, icons, for example, painted on cases of ammunition and things like that. It's very interesting. Do we have another hand?
Hello. My name is Yaroslava Babenchuk. I am a born Ukrainian and adopted American citizen. I know Olesia personally. I lived and worked in Ukraine for a long time in the cultural field. So I worked for State University of New York, and my feedback on everything we've discussed is that we need to find a way to connect higher education institutions to our efforts, because even as a State University of New York university system, I know lots of my colleagues in other schools. I'm in Suffolk, but generally we have unique backgrounds, resources. We have interests from students who are young people who are asking for knowledge. They're asking for information. They're asking for emotion. And we are not providing that because we are not prepared. So I think we need to think how to connect through those massive institutions around the country and connect young people to what is happening in Ukraine, what is happening in the young community of artists in Ukraine. That way, building up, using the momentum and building up. There are many other things we can do, but I think from my background, this is one of the most important things. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, thank you very much. Kath?
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Thank you very much, Glenn, for moderating. This is really, really wonderful, very thought-provoking, and really on behalf of our audience and everybody at the Ukrainian Institute of America, we really appreciate your valuable insights, all the hard work that you do under terrible conditions, and to basically to showcase what Ukraine is all about on the cultural front. Before we move on to the reception, I'd like to invite all of you to explore several of our exhibits here. For those of you who may not be familiar with the Ukrainian Institute, we have both permanent collections and rotating temporary exhibits. On the first floor, you'll find a captivating installation, our Pisanka project, which is curated by one of our members, Sofika Zdelik. She is in the audience today. So it's got a great story, again, about a very traditional art form, and of which she is a leading world expert, and how it ties into the war and the meaning of the installation. Here on the second floor, you see our current exhibit, which is a lot of land and seascape paintings by Armin Boshko, blending Ukrainian and Armenian influences. And apropos of what Volodymyr was saying, unfortunately, right now we don't have the exhibit up, but please come back. It will come up. We, on the third floor, normally have a fallen artist's room, which actually was curated by the very handsome gentleman standing in the back and with the embroidered shirt, who is also a world-renowned ballroom dancer, and he and his wife curated our fallen artist's room, which is a photographic memoir of artists from all walks of life, musicians, filmmakers, ballet dancers, opera stars that unfortunately lost their lives on the front line or at the hand of our aggressor via a missile attack or a bombing. So again, I do invite you to come back. We're open to the public, usually Thursdays through Sundays, but check our website because we do also have a lot of special events and that we close the doors for. And most importantly, I would like to express our profound gratitude and appreciation to the U.S. Department of State for not only for helping to organize this amazing event, but for all of the programs that you fund and for your interest and engagement in culture, not only Ukrainian but for all cultures around the world. It really was. I hate to say it, but it was a huge surprise to me to really learn all of the all of the different activities that you underwrite. And so the team here, thank you to the team that worked very hard to put it together, both on the State Department side and on the Ukrainian Institute side. And we really value the collaboration and the partnership and hope that we can do something like this again. Thank you to everybody in the audience, and please stick around. We have some coffee and people can talk and hopefully get to know one another. So thank you and have a great day.